Her hands trembling, clutched letters promising a future of love and prosperity under the vast Montana sky. For Clara May Thompson, these pieces of paper were a gospel, her reason for enduring a grueling 2,000-mile journey from the civilized comforts of Boston to the raw, untamed frontier. She had sacrificed everything for the man who penned them, a man she believed to be her destiny. But she was about to discover that in the heart of the unforgiving West, some promises were not just broken, they were shattered with a fist, leaving her with nothing but dust and blood. This is the story of how rejection forged a will of iron, and how the quietest man in the valley became the only world she had left. The year was 1884, and the air that Clara May Thompson breathed was a cocktail of coal smoke sweat and the metallic tang of progress. For 6 days, the Northern Pacific Railroad had been her rattling, swaying world. It was a world away from the manicured lawns and polite society of Beacon Hill, Boston, where a woman's worth was measured by her dowry and her stitching. Clara had a modest dowry, and her stitching was impeccable, but her heart had been captured by words on a page mailed from a place she could barely imagine, Serenity Creek, Montana territory. The words belonged to Mr. Sterling Roberts, his letters now worn soft as calf skin from countless readings painted a life of thrilling potential. He wrote of a burgeoning empire of commerce, of building a town from scratch of a land so rich you could practically taste the gold in the water. He was, by his own account, a visionary, a man of industry and influence. His penmanship was a confident masculine scrawl, and his prose was intoxicating. He had met her brother briefly during a business trip back east, and had commenced a correspondence courtship that had consumed Clara's world for the better part of a year. My dearest Clara, one letter began the one she kept tucked in her bodice. The sight of the Gallatin Range at dawn would steal the very breath from your lungs. It is a canvas only God could paint, and my single regret is that I gaze upon it alone. Your portrait sits upon my desk, a pale imitation, I am sure, of the grace and beauty I will soon have the privilege of calling my own. Hurry to me, my love. Our future awaits. He had sent her the train fare, a gesture of such grand confidence that it silenced the worried whispers of her aunts. He had promised a home, a life, a purpose, beyond needlepoint and chaperoned walks in the park. He had promised to be waiting on the platform, ready to sweep her into the life she'd only dreamed of. The train finally hissed to a stop, its great iron lungs sighing steam into the crisp Montana air. The platform at Serenity Creek was not the grand affair she had envisioned. It was a rough-hewn timber structure, stained with tobacco juice and grime. The town itself was a chaotic jumble of false-fronted buildings, a muddy main street churned by wagon wheels and horse hooves. Saloons with their swinging doors seemed to outnumber all other establishments. The air smelled of pine manure and frying fat. This was not the canvas of God. It was a rough sketch, smudged and chaotic. Clara, in her dark green traveling suit and hat, pinned just so, was a splash of vibrant, out-of-place color in a world of brown and gray. Men in dusty hats and worn denim stopped and stared, their gazes ranging from curious to openly lewd. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for the handsome, clean-shaven face from the small photograph he had sent. She didn't see him. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of her hope. She clutched her valise, her knuckles white. Perhaps he was delayed. A man of his importance, surely he had pressing business. "Ma'am, you need some help with your luggage," a young porter asked, his face freckled and earnest. I'm looking for Mr. Sterling Roberts. He was to meet me here." The porter's eyes widened slightly in recognition, then flickered with something she couldn't quite read. pity Mr. Roberts. Oh, he's a busy man, ma'am. His office is down the way, the 2-story building, the only one with glass windows upstairs. Serenity Creek Land and Title Company. Gratitude washed over her. Of course. He was at his office. A man of commerce. She thanked the boy, paid him a nickel to watch her larger trunk, and began her walk down the main street. The boardwalk planks groaned under her fashionable but entirely impractical boots. The stairs continued, making the back of her neck burn. From inside the largest saloon, the gilded cage, a piano played a tinny, cheerful tune that felt like a mockery of her rising anxiety. The Serenity Creek Land and Title Company was, as the porter described, the most impressive building on the street. It was freshly painted, a stark white, against the weathered grey of its neighbours. Through the large window, she could see a man standing behind a grand oak desk, gesturing with authority as he spoke to 2 other men. He was tall, dressed in a tailored suit, his dark hair impeccably styled. It was him. Sterling Roberts. He was even more handsome than his photograph. Relief made her weak. She pushed open the heavy door, a small bell announcing her arrival. Sterling Roberts and his companions stopped talking and turned. His eyes, a cool, calculating grey, swept over her. There was no flicker of recognition, no warm smile of a lover meeting his promised bride. There was only appraisal, as if he were judging livestock. "May I help you?" he asked, his voice smooth, but devoid of the warmth that had filled his letters. Clara's own voice was a breathless whisper, Sterling at his eye. Clara May Thompson. She saw it then. A flash of annoyance crossed his face, quickly masked by a practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. "Miss Thompson, you've arrived." He made it sound like an inconvenience, like a package delivered to the wrong address. "I have," she said, her smile faltering. The journey was long. He gestured dismissively to the 2 men with him. "Gentlemen, if you'll excuse us for a moment." The men, rough-looking ranchers by their attire, tipped their hats and exited, casting curious glances at Clara. Once they were alone, Sterling's facade dropped entirely. He did not move from behind the desk. He did not rush to embrace her. He simply looked at her, his lips pressed into a thin, displeased line. "Miss Thompson," he began the formality, a slap in the face. "Your arrival presents something of a complication." "Complication?" Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What do you mean? Your letters?" "Ah, yes. The letters." He waved a hand as if swatting away a fly. "A man gets lonely on the frontier, Miss Thompson. He paints pictures with words. Sometimes he gets carried away. It's a common affliction." The blood drained from her face. "Carried away, Sterling, you sent for me. You asked me to be your wife." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. A proposal of marriage is a complex negotiation. Circumstances change, alliances shift. When I began our correspondence, my position in this town was still tenuous. An alliance with a respectable family from the East seemed advantageous. An alliance, she repeated the word, tasting like ash. "You wrote of love." "I wrote of many things," he said coldly. "Frankly, Miss Thompson, you are not quite what I had envisioned. The portrait you sent was flattering. And this town requires a woman of a certain fortitude, a hardiness you clearly lack." He gestured to her fine dress, her pale hands. "You are a delicate flower, and this is no place for a greenhouse." The cruelty was so direct, so breathtaking it left her speechless. Every hope she had nurtured, every dream she had built around his words, crumbled into dust. "But what am I to do?" She stammered, her mind reeling. "I have spent nearly all my money. My family believes I am to be married. I have nowhere to go." "That is hardly my concern." he said, his voice turning sharp. "You have made a grave miscalculation. I suggest you purchase a return ticket on the next train east." He reached into his waistcoat, pulled out a small clutch of bills and tossed them onto the desk. They weren't enough for a return ticket. It was insult money. Humiliation burned through her hot and fierce, finally eclipsing the shock. Her pride, the one thing she had left, flared to life. "You are a monster," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "I am a pragmatist," he corrected, "and I have made other arrangements. A more suitable match. The letters," she said, her hand instinctively going to her bodice. "The promises you made. The things you wrote about your business dealings about." His eyes narrowed dangerously. For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed his face. "Fear." "What about my letters? They tell a different story than the one you're telling now, Mr. Roberts. A story of a man who makes promises he has no intention of keeping. Give them to me," he commanded, his voice low and menacing. "No," she said, taking a step back. "They are all I have left of the fool I was." He moved, then, striding around the desk with a speed that startled her. He was much larger up close. He loomed over her, his clean-shaven face twisted in a snarl. "You will give me those letters, you foolish girl. They are my property. They are addressed to me." He grabbed for her, his fingers biting into her arm. Clara cried out and tried to pull away, but he was too strong. His other hand darted for the bodice of her dress. She slapped his hand away, a sharp, cracking sound in the quiet office. His face went dark with fury. The mask of the civilized businessman vanished, replaced by the raw brutality of a frontier tyrant. "You little bitch," he hissed. His open hand struck her across the face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward. Her hat flew off. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and the sharp, coppery taste of blood filled her mouth. She fell, her hip hitting the hard floor with a sickening thud, her head cracking against the leg of a chair. The world swam in a nauseating blur of pain and disbelief. He stood over her, breathing heavily, his face a mask of rage. "Get out," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "Get out of my town. If I see you again, you'll regret it far more than this." He turned his back on her, walking back to his desk and pouring himself a whiskey with a shaking hand. He did not look at her again. Through a haze of tears and pain, Clara scrambled to her feet. She retrieved her hat, her movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Every part of her ached. Her cheek was on fire, her lips split open. But the deepest wound was the one she couldn't see, the gaping chasm where her future had been only moments before. She stumbled out of the office, the bell mocking her exit, and back into the harsh, indifferent sunlight of Serenity Creek. She leaned against the building, gasping for breath, the world spinning around her. Across the street, leaning against a post in the shade of the livery stable, a man had watched the entire scene unfold through the large glass window. He'd seen her enter, hopeful and bright. He'd seen the confrontation. He'd seen the brutal, shocking violence. Cole Dawson straightened up his face, grim. He was a man who blended into the brown and grey landscape of the West. His hat was low, his face weathered by sun and wind, his clothes practical and worn. He was not a man who sought trouble. He had left that life behind him. But what he had just witnessed stirred something cold and old inside him. He watched the woman so utterly broken, so terrifyingly alone, and for the first time, in a long time, Cole Dawson felt the pull of something other than his own quiet solitude. He pushed off the post and began to walk, not towards her, but towards the Gilded Cage saloon. He needed a drink, and he needed to think. The quiet life he had built for himself had just been disturbed by the arrival of a woman from Boston, and the casual cruelty of Serenity Creek's most powerful man. The world outside Sterling Roberts's office was a cruel, spinning vortex. Clara May Thompson clung to the rough wooden siding of the building, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The Montana sun, which had seemed so promising from a train window, now felt accusatory, exposing her shame to the entire town. Men on the boardwalk stopped to stare, their whispers like the buzzing of flies. She was a spectacle, the well-dressed Eastern lady, now disheveled, crying with a blossoming bruise on her cheek and blood on her lips. Her money was nearly gone. Her trunk containing all her worldly possessions was back at the train station. The pittance Roberts had thrown at her wouldn't get her halfway back to Wyoming, let alone Boston. She was trapped adrift in a sea of hostile, staring faces. The future he had painted in his letters had been a mirage, and she had walked willingly into the desert. A shadow fell over her. She flinched, expecting another blow, another curse. "Ma'am, you ought not to be standing out here." The voice was low and gentle, belonging to an older woman, with a face as lined as a dried apple and kind, weary eyes. She wore a simple calico dress and apron, and her hands, though chapped and red, looked strong. I have nowhere to go," Clara whispered, the admission costing her the last of her pride. "Nobody's got nowhere to go," the woman said gruffly, though her tone was soft. "Folks just end up in places they didn't plan on. Name's Martha. I run the boarding house and laundry at the end of the street. It ain't the Copley Plaza, but it's clean, and the roof don't leak most of the time. Come on." Martha didn't wait for an answer. She simply took Clara's arm, her grip surprisingly firm, and guided her away from the prying eyes of the main street. The walk was a blur of shame for Clara. She felt like a fallen woman being led away the gazes of the townspeople like physical blows. Martha, however, seemed impervious. Her chin held high as she steered Clara toward a modest but sturdy-looking building with a sign that read, "Martha's Rooms and Laundry." No riffraff. Inside, the smell of lye soap and clean linen was a comforting balm. Martha led her to a small room at the back, furnished with a simple iron-frame bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a single wooden chair. "You can stay here for now," Martha said, bustling over to the washstand and pouring water into the bowl. "Let's get that face cleaned up. That Sterling Roberts, he's got a poison in him. All smiles and handshakes till he don't get what he wants." She dipped a cloth in the cool water and gently dabbed at Clara's split lip. Clara winced. "He's a snake in a suit," Martha continued, her voice low. "Came here 2 years ago with money from back east. Bought up claims, started the land office. Now he thinks he owns the whole damn valley. He's betrothed to Harrison Kane's daughter, you know. Kane's the biggest cattle baron in this part of the territory. Roberts ain't marrying a woman. He's marrying an empire." The words hit Clara like another slap. So that was it. A more suitable match. She wasn't just rejected, she was callously replaced as part of a business transaction. I can pay you," Clara said, her voice shaky. "I have some money, and I can work. I can sew, I can do mending. We'll sort that out later," Martha said, finishing her ministration. "First you rest. Ain't no problem in the world that don't look a little smaller after a good night's sleep." But sleep didn't come. Clara lay on the lumpy mattress, staring at the ceiling as shadows lengthened outside. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant shout from the street sent a fresh wave of fear through her. She was an insect caught in a spider's web, and the spider was Sterling Roberts. The letters still tucked in her bodice felt like they were burning a hole through her skin. They were the proof of his lies, the last vestige of her foolishness, and she now realized with a dawning terror a potential source of great danger. He wanted them back, and a man who would strike a woman in his office would surely not hesitate to use other means. Meanwhile, in the gilded cage, saloon Cole Dawson nursed a whiskey. The piano player was banging out another tune, and the room was thick with the smoke and noise of men letting off steam. Cole was an island of quiet in the chaos. He wasn't a large man, but there was a stillness about him, a coiled efficiency in his movements that discouraged interruption. He'd come to the Gallatin Valley 3 years ago, buying a small, hard scrabble piece of land up in the foothills, a place nobody else wanted. He kept a few head of cattle, a horse, and to himself. The folks in Serenity Creek knew him as a quiet rancher who came to town for supplies and left without much fuss. No one knew he'd once worn a U.S. Marshal's star until the weight of it became too heavy to bear. He'd seen enough violence to last a lifetime. He'd come here for peace, and today peace had been shattered. The image of Robert striking that woman was seared into his mind. It wasn't just the act itself, but the arrogance of it, the absolute certainty that he was above consequence. It reminded Cole of all the things he had tried to leave behind, the bullies, the tyrants who used power and fear as their currency. He finished his whiskey, the raw spirit doing little to calm the cold knot in his gut. He knew he should stay out of it. It was not his fight. The woman Clara was a stranger. Getting involved with anything concerning Sterling Roberts was like walking into a bear trap. But leaving her to her fate felt like a betrayal of the man he once was, the man he sometimes feared he had lost completely. His decision made, he left the saloon and walked to Martha's. He knocked on the back door. Martha answered, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him. Cole Dawson. What do you want? If you're looking for trouble, you've come to the wrong place. No, ma'am, he said, his voice a low rumble. I'm here about your new boarder, the lady from the train. Martha's expression softened slightly. What about her? I saw what happened. At Roberts's office. Half the town did, she said bitterly. She's in a bad spot, Cole stated, not asking. Roberts won't let her be, not if she's a loose end. And what do you propose to do about it? The question hung in the air. Cole looked down at his worn boots, then back at her. I need a hand at my place, mending fences, cooking, keeping the cabin. It's hard work, not what she's used to, but it's a place to be, a place Roberts won't come knocking. Martha studied him for a long moment, her gaze sharp and appraising. She saw not a troublemaker, but a man wrestling with his conscience. Why, Cole? You ain't never taken an interest in anyone's problems before. Maybe I'm tired of seeing the wrong people win, he said simply. Martha nodded slowly. All right, I'll talk to her. But if you harm one hair on that girl's head, Cole Dawson, I'll see you horsewhipped from here to Bozeman. Understood. Understood, he said, tipping his hat before turning and disappearing into the twilight. The next morning, Martha presented the offer to Clara. He's a strange one, Cole Dawson. Quiet as a tombstone. Lives up in the foothills on a patch of rock and hope. But he's honest. I've never known him to cheat a man or tell a lie. It's not Boston, child. It's hard work, and it'll be just the two of you up there. But it's safe. Safer than here anyway. Clara looked at her hands, soft and pale, now blistered from her own anxious wringing. She thought of the journey she had taken, the hopes she had carried. All of it had led to this, an offer of drudgery and isolation from a stranger. But then she thought of Sterling's face, contorted with rage, and the paralyzing fear of being alone and penniless in this town that he owned. The wilderness with a quiet stranger seemed infinitely safer than the civilization of Serenity Creek. I'll do it, she said, her voice small but firm. 2 days later, Cole arrived with a buckboard wagon. He wordlessly loaded her trunk, which Martha had helped her retrieve from the station. The town watched their departure. Clara, sitting beside the silent man, could feel Sterling Roberts's eyes on her from his office window. She didn't look. She kept her gaze fixed forward on the dusty road that led away from the town and into the vast, intimidating wilderness. The journey to Cole's ranch was a silent one. He handled the horses with an easy, competent grace, his attention on the trail. The foothills rose to meet them, covered in pine and aspen. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The world felt immense, stretching out in every direction under a sky of impossible blue. It was beautiful and terrifying. His homestead was little more than a small, sturdy log cabin, a barn and a corral, all nestled in a small valley bisected by a rushing creek. It was rustic to the point of being primitive. Inside the cabin consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a sleeping loft. It was Spartan, but clean. "The loft is yours." Cole said his first words in over an hour. "There's a mattress and blankets. The well is out back. The woodshed is next to it." He laid out the terms of their arrangement with blunt practicality. She would cook, clean, mend his clothes, and tend to the small vegetable garden. In return, she would have food and shelter. It was a business transaction, nothing more. He was careful to maintain a physical distance, a formal courtesy, that was both a relief and a source of profound loneliness. The first weeks were a trial by fire for Clara. The crisp mountain air was thin, leaving her breathless. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the wind in the pines and the cry of hawks. Her soft hands, accustomed to needlework, were soon raw and blistered from hauling water-chopping vegetables and scrubbing laundry against a washboard. She burned the biscuits and made the coffee too weak. She knew nothing of the rhythms of this life. Cole was a patient, if distant, teacher. He never raised his voice, never criticized her directly. He would simply show her. He taught her how to bank the fire at night, so embers remained in the morning, how to distinguish edible berries from poisonous ones, how to load the shotgun in case of a bear or mountain lion. He communicated in actions, not words. They were two strangers living in forced intimacy, sharing a tiny space, but separated by a chasm of experience. At night, she would lie in the loft, listening to the lonely sound of his breathing below, and clutch the packet of Sterling's letters. They were a bitter reminder of her past, but also her only link to it. She was no longer Clara May Thompson of Beacon Hill. She was a cook and a housekeeper on a remote Montana ranch, a ghost in another person's life. The man downstairs, the quiet cowboy who had offered her a refuge, was as much a mystery to her as the sprawling wild land outside the cabin walls. She had traveled 2,000 miles to be rejected and beaten, and had ended up in a world she didn't understand, beholden to a man she didn't know. Life on Cole's homestead settled into a stark, demanding routine. Days were measured not by the clock, but by the sun's arc across the sky. Clara learned to rise before dawn, her body aching in protest, to stir the fire and put coffee on to boil. She learned the heft of an axe, the rhythm of kneading dough, the telltale signs of a coming storm in the shape of the clouds over the peaks. The delicate woman from Boston was being stripped away layer by layer, replaced by someone tougher, more resilient. Her hands, once soft, became calloused. Her skin, once pale, was browned by the sun. Cole remained an enigma. He was a creature of habit and silence. He would leave at sunrise to work his land, mending fences, checking on his small herd of Hereford cattle, clearing rock from the stubborn soil. He would return at dusk, weary and covered in dust, eat the meal she prepared in near silence, and then sit by the fire sharpening a tool or patching a piece of leather. Yet in his silence, there were small acts of kindness that Clara began to notice. One morning, she found a new sharper axe by the woodshed, its handle sanded smooth to prevent splinters. After she struggled for an hour trying to hoist a sack of flour, he wordlessly fashioned a pulley system for her. He never mentioned these things. They simply appeared small, unspoken acknowledgments of her struggles. Clara, in turn, began to transform the cabin. She used her mending skills to patch the curtains and darn his worn shirts with neat, almost invisible stitches. Using wild berries and a little sugar from their precious supplies, she made a jam that tasted of the mountain summer. One evening, Cole took a bite of a biscuit, spread with the jam, and he stopped. He looked at it then at her, and gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. For Clara, it was more validating than a flowery compliment. The chasm between them remained, but a fragile bridge of mutual respect was slowly being built. She started to see the man beneath the quiet exterior. She saw the way his eyes, the color of a stormy sky, would soften when he looked at his horse. She saw the weariness in his shoulders at the end of a long day, a weariness that spoke of more than just physical labor. She began to wonder about the man he was before he came to this valley, about the source of the profound sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his unguarded moments. Their fragile peace was destined to be broken. One afternoon, as Clara was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, she heard the sound of approaching horses. It wasn't Cole. He was on the far side of the property. Her heart seized with a familiar dread. Two men rode into the clearing. They were not ranchers. They wore town clothes and pistol belts, and their faces held the smug, predatory look of men who enjoyed their work. She recognized one of them from Sterling Roberts's office. "Well, now look what we have here," the lead man said, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "The little Boston bird has found a new cage." Clara stood her ground, the basket of eggs clutched in her hand. "What do you want? Mr. Roberts sent us," the man said, dismounting. "He's a forgiving man. He's willing to forget your little misunderstanding. He just wants what's his. A packet of letters, I believe." "They are my property," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man chuckled a nasty sound. "See, that's where you're wrong. Anything that can cause Mr. Roberts trouble is his business, and he wants his business concluded. Now you can give them to us nice and easy, or we can tear this whole place apart looking for them. Your choice." Fear warred with a stubborn, newfound defiance. This cabin, this hard life, it was hers now. She had earned her place here, with sweat and pain. She would not let these thugs violate it. "You're trespassing. Get off this land." The man's smile vanished. "Feisty, ain't she?" he said to his companion. He took a step toward her. "We don't have time for games, lady." Suddenly a voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "That's far enough." Cole was standing at the edge of the tree line, not 20 yards away. He held a Winchester rifle, and it was not pointed at the sky. He had moved with the silence of a predator, and the two men started their hands instinctively moving towards their guns. "This is private property," Cole said, his voice flat and deadly. "I know who you work for. Tell Roberts if he wants something from this ranch, he can come get it himself. Now turn your horses around and ride out. Don't look back." The lead thug hesitated, his eyes flicking from Cole's steady rifle to Clara, then back. He was weighing the odds. Whatever he saw in Cole's face made his decision for him. There was no fear there, no uncertainty. There was only a promise of swift, efficient violence. "This ain't over," the thug snarled, climbing back onto his horse. "Roberts gets what he wants, always." They wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy silence behind them. Clara's legs finally gave out, and she sank onto a nearby log, the basket of eggs forgotten at her feet. Cole walked over his eyes, scanning the trail where the men had disappeared. He didn't lower the rifle until they were long out of sight. He finally looked at her, his face grim. "Are you all right?" She nodded, unable to speak. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was no longer a comfortable quiet, but a tense, watchful one. After their meager supper, Cole didn't retreat into his usual chores. He sat at the table cleaning the Winchester, his movements deliberate and precise. "He won't stop," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "As long as I have those letters, he'll keep coming." Cole didn't look up from his work. "What's in them? Why is he so afraid of them?" Clara took a deep breath. She had kept the contents of the letters a secret, a private shame. But now secrecy was a luxury they could no longer afford. "He wrote about everything. He was trying to impress me, to paint himself as a powerful man. He wrote about his plans for the valley, about how he was cheating Harrison Kane." Cole's hands stilled. He looked up, his grey eyes sharp. "What do you mean, cheating him?" "He wrote about how the railroad was planning a spur line, a route they hadn't made public yet. He was using inside information from a contact at the Northern Pacific to buy up the land along the proposed route for pennies on the dollar land that belonged to smaller homesteaders or was part of Kane's open range. He called it securing the future. He bragged that once the route was announced, the land would be worth 100 times what he paid. He said Kane was an old dinosaur who didn't see the future coming, and that by the time he married his daughter Amelia, he'd already owned the most valuable parts of the Kane empire right out from under him. Cole let out a low whistle. It was a scheme of audacious, criminal arrogance. Sterling Roberts wasn't just a bully. He was a sophisticated thief, and the letters were the only proof. Now his pursuit of Clara made perfect, terrifying sense. It wasn't about pride. It was about survival. If Harrison Kane ever saw those letters, Roberts would be ruined, if not buried in an unmarked grave. "You're sitting on a stick of dynamite," Clara Cole said, his voice grave. "I know," she whispered. "I should have burned them." "No," he said, and the certainty in his voice surprised her. "No. Men like Roberts, they count on people being scared. They count on them burning the evidence. You did the right thing by keeping them." He finished cleaning the rifle and stood up. He walked over to a loose floorboard near the hearth, pried it up, and pulled out an old oilcloth-wrapped bundle. He unrolled it on the table. Inside was a Colt Peacemaker revolver and a worn leather gun belt. The metal shone with the dull gleam of meticulous care. Beside it was a tarnished silver star, a U.S. Marshal's badge. Clara stared at it, her mind struggling to connect the quiet rancher she knew with the symbol of federal law. "You were a marshal." He nodded, his gaze distant. "A long time ago. I worked the Oklahoma Territory. Saw too many good people get hurt. Too many bad men walk free on technicalities. Saw a partner get killed because of a politician's ambition. I got tired of the fight. I came here looking for quiet." He looked at her, and his eyes held a deep, profound sorrow. "Looks like the fight found me anyway." He strapped on the gun belt. It settled on his hips with a familiarity that spoke of years of wear. The quiet homesteader was gone, replaced by someone more dangerous, more focused. The transformation was both frightening and, to Clara's surprise, deeply reassuring. "He'll send more than 2 men this next time," Cole said. "He'll get bolder." "We need a plan." Clara looked at the letters on the table, then at the gun on Cole's hip, and finally at the man himself. Her journey had brought her to this cabin, to this moment of truth. She was no longer just a victim of Sterling Roberts. She was the keeper of his downfall, and the silent cowboy, the man who had offered her shelter out of pity, had just revealed himself to be the one man in the valley who might be able to protect her. The world had shrunk to the size of this small cabin, but for the first time since arriving in Montana, Clara May Thompson did not feel entirely alone. The visit from Roberts's men shattered the fragile peace of the homestead. The quiet that had once been comforting now felt menacing, filled with the anticipation of violence. Every night, Cole unrolled his bedroll on the floor by the door, the worn Colt peacemaker resting on the planks beside him. The cabin, once a simple refuge, had become a fortress under siege. Fear was a constant companion for Clara, a cold knot in her stomach. Yet mingled with the fear was a new and unfamiliar feeling, a hard, defiant anger. This land, this life, she had bled for it. She would not let it be taken from her by a coward and his hired thugs. A few nights after the incident, Cole broke the tense silence that had settled over their supper. "We can't wait for him to come to us," he said, his voice low and steady. "He has us trapped up here. The next time, he won't send 2 men to talk. He'll send a dozen to burn us out and pick through the ashes for what he wants. We have to take the fight to him." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. "How, Cole? In town, he's a king. He's a king whose throne is built on a lie." Cole countered, his grey eyes intent. "And you have the proof that can topple it. His power right now comes from one man, Harrison Kane. Roberts is engaged to his daughter, and he uses Kane's name like a shield. We need to show Kane that the man he's welcoming into his family is a viper." The audacity of the plan was terrifying. Harrison Kane was a legend in the territory, a cattle baron who ruled his empire with an iron fist. He was proud, powerful, and notoriously intolerant of public scandal. "He'll never believe me," Clara whispered. "To him, I'm just a jilted woman, an inconvenience." "He won't believe you." Cole agreed, nodding. "He'll believe Sterling Roberts. He'll believe the words Roberts wrote himself, bragging about how he was going to swindle Kane out of his best land. Men like Kane respect proof. They respect courage." He looked at her, his expression serious. "Roberts is hosting a public engagement dinner tomorrow night at the Grand Hotel. He'll be surrounded by the town's most important people, feeling untouchable. That's where you'll confront him." The thought made her feel faint. "I can't do that alone." "You won't be alone," he promised, a flicker of the old lawman in his eyes. "You have to be the one to face him, to deliver the letters. It's your story, your truth. But I will be there. I will make sure you get the chance to tell it." The next day passed in a surreal haze. Clara found her best dress, a modest navy blue wool, and pressed it with shaking hands. It felt like preparing for her own execution. She wrapped the worn letters in a piece of oilcloth and placed them in her small handbag, where they felt as heavy as stones. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, they rode for Serenity Creek, avoiding the main trail. Cole was silent, his focus absolute, a reassuring presence against the tide of her fear. They dismounted at the edge of town and crept through the back alleys, the boisterous sounds of the saloons, a jarring reminder of Clara's first terrible day. The Grand Hotel was ablaze with light. Through the large dining room windows, they saw the scene, Sterling Roberts, at the head of a long table looking polished and triumphant, with the pretty dark-haired Amelia Kane at his side. At her other side sat Harrison Kane himself, a formidable patriarch with a mane of white hair and a face that looked like it was carved from the granite. Cole led her to the kitchen entrance where Martha was anxiously waiting. "The good Lord be with you, child," the old woman whispered, squeezing Clara's hand before slipping her inside among the chaos of cooks and servers. Peeking through a crack in the door, Clara watched as Sterling Roberts stood tapping a glass for a toast. "Friends," he began, his voice oozing confidence, We celebrate tonight a glorious union and the dawn of a new era of prosperity." Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the hotel's main entrance. Two loud arguing drunks paid $1 by Cole caused several guests to turn their heads. In that moment of distraction, Cole positioned himself inside the dining room, a silent sentinel near the door. It was the signal. Taking a breath that felt like it was tearing her lungs, Clara pushed through the swinging doors and walked into the room. The effect was instantaneous. A wave of silence washed over the diners. Laughter died in throats. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Sterling Roberts stopped mid-sentence, his handsome face contorting into a mask of disbelief, then rage. Harrison Kane's bushy eyebrows drew together in a thunderous scowl. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Kane's voice boomed across the room. Clara's own voice, when she found it, didn't tremble. It was clear and carried the weight of her long journey. "My name is Clara May Thompson, Mr. Kane. I am the woman to whom your future son-in-law promised marriage, right before he sent for me to travel 2,000 miles to be here." Lies. Roberts hissed his face, turning a blotchy red. "This woman is a delusional tramp. I had her run out of town." "Someone remove her." Two of Roberts's associates started to rise, but they stopped cold as Cole took a single deliberate step away from the wall. He said nothing. He did not draw his gun. He simply stood there, an immovable object, and his quiet presence was more threatening than any shout. "She has proof," Roberts Cole stated, his voice flat. Proof. Kane demanded, his piercing eyes now locked on Clara. With a steady hand, Clara opened her bag, retrieved the oilcloth-wrapped packet, and walked to the head table. She placed the letters directly in front of the cattle baron. "His proof, Mr. Kane." In his own hand, she said. He wrote of many things, including his detailed plans to use confidential railroad information to defraud you and your fellow ranchers, buying up the most valuable parts of your rangeland before he even placed a ring on your daughter's finger. The color drained from Sterling's face as Kane picked up the letters. The room was so quiet that the rustle of the paper was audible. Kane's granite expression grew darker with every page he turned. He was a hard man, but he was no fool. The names, the land parcels, the arrogant, boastful tone, it was all there. It was a confession. Finally, Kane looked up. The rage in his eyes was terrifying to behold. He didn't look at Clara or Cole. He stared directly at the trembling man who had been moments before his future son-in-law. "You peacocking two-bit swindler Kane," whispered, his voice shaking with fury. He rose to his full, intimidating height. In one swift motion, he backhanded Sterling across the face with the packet of letters. Paper scattered across the white tablecloth. "You came into my home. You sat at my table. You asked for my daughter's hand. And you were plotting to gut my life's work." "Harrison, please, I can explain," Sterling stammered. "Explain," Kane roared, pointing to his own grim-faced ranch hands. "Get him out of my sight. Take him to his office and make sure he doesn't leave it. I will deal with him personally." As Roberts was unceremoniously hauled away, all his power and influence vanishing in an instant, the room began to buzz with shocked whispers. Harrison Kane turned his gaze to Clara. It was hard, but it held a new respect. "You have a spine, Miss Thompson." He glanced at Cole. "And you, Dawson, you choose your fights well." He made a move to reach inside his coat. "We don't want your money," Mr. Kane, Cole said firmly. "All we want is to be left in peace." Kane paused, then gave a slow nod. "You'll have it. I give you my word." It was a promise as good as gold in the Montana Territory. Together, Cole and Clara turned and walked out of the hotel. They left the debris of Sterling Roberts's shattered life behind them and stepped into the cool, clean air of the night. The long road back to the homestead was waiting, But for the first time, it felt like they were truly going home. The ride back to the homestead was as quiet as the ride into town, but the silence was of a different quality. It was not the tense, watchful silence of before, but a deep, shared peace. The weight of Sterling Roberts's threat, a shadow that had loomed over them for weeks, had been lifted. The vast Montana night, once intimidating to Clara, now felt like a comforting blanket studded with 1,000,000 brilliant stars. They reached the cabin as the first hint of dawn was painting the eastern sky in shades of violet and rose. The small log structure, which had once seemed like a prison of hardship, now looked like a sanctuary. It was the place she had earned, the place she had fought for. Cole unsaddled the horses, while Clara went inside. She lit a lamp, the soft yellow light, pushing back the last of the night's shadows. The cabin was exactly as they had left it, a humble space that held the entire story of her transformation. She ran a hand over the rough-hewn table, a table where she had cried in frustration over burned bread and later shared quiet, satisfying meals. She looked up at the loft, her first refuge, and then at the stone hearth, the heart of their shared home. When Cole came in, he didn't start his usual routine. He simply stood in the doorway watching her. The gun belt was gone, hung on a peg by the door. He was a rancher again, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. The lines of their formal arrangement, employer and housekeeper, had been blurred by the shared danger, and now erased completely by their shared victory. "It's over," she said the words, both a statement and a question. "It's over," he confirmed. "Kane will make sure of it. Roberts will be lucky if he leaves the territory with the shirt on his back." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with all the things they had never said. They were no longer just allies. They were a man and a woman, alone in a cabin, their future an unwritten page. "Cole," she began, her voice soft. "Why did you do it? Why did you help me? You could have turned me away that first day. Your life would have been much quieter." He walked over to the fireplace, resting a hand on the cool stone of the mantel. He stared into the cold embers for a long moment before answering. "When I left the Marshals, I made a promise to myself. No more fights. No more getting involved. I saw what violence does to people, to the ones who deal it and the ones who receive it. It poisons everything." He turned to face her, and his eyes held the deep sadness she had only glimpsed before. "But sitting in that saloon after watching what Roberts did to you, I realized that not fighting is its own kind of poison. It lets men like him win. It lets the world believe that cruelty is stronger than decency. Helping you. It wasn't about you, not at first. It was about me. About trying to feel like the man I used to be." He took a step closer, his gaze softening. "But then it did become about you. I saw you refuse to break. I saw you get up every morning with your hands blistered and your heart broken and face the day. I saw you take this hard, lonely place and start to make it a home. You have a strength in you, Clara, a resilience that's more powerful than any man's fists or guns." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. This quiet, solitary man had seen her. Not the delicate Boston lady, not the disgraced victim, but the person she was becoming. "And what about you, Cole?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Who is the man you used to be?" "He was a man who believed in justice," he said quietly. "He lost his way for a while. I think you helped him find it again." He closed the small distance between them. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. It was the first time he had touched her with anything other than formal necessity. The touch was electric, a current of unspoken feeling passing between them. He didn't speak in the flowery, poetic language of Sterling's letters. His words were simple, direct, and unshakably true. "I don't have much to offer, Clara. Just this patch of land and a life of hard work. It's not Boston. It's not what you came here for." She looked up at him into his stormy grey eyes and saw her future. It wasn't a future of wealth or high society. It would be a future of struggle, of shared burdens and small, hard-won triumphs. It would be real. "It's more than what I came here for," she whispered. "What I came for was a lie. This is real." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of fiery, demanding passion, but one of deep, reverent tenderness. It was a kiss that sealed a pact, a promise not of ease but of partnership. It was the quiet confirmation of two lonely souls finding a home in one another. Clara May Thompson had traveled 2,000 miles for a world promised in beautiful, deceitful words. She had been rejected, beaten, and left with nothing. But in the heart of the unforgiving Montana wilderness, in a small log cabin, with a quiet, solitary cowboy, she had found a different world entirely. It was not a world that was given to her. It was a world they would build together, with their own two hands, under the vast and watchful sky. And it was a world that was finally her own. Clara May Thompson's journey did not end with a storybook wedding or a sudden inheritance. It began with a choice to face the harsh realities of a new life with courage, and to trust the quiet strength of a man who saw her true worth. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest heartbreaks are the very things that lead us to our most profound destinies. It proves that a home is not always a place you travel to, but something you build with someone who makes you feel safe in a wild, unpredictable world. If Clara's journey from heartbreak to defiant strength resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of second chances, please give this video a like to help her story reach others. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of resilience. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true life stories from the dust and grit of the American West. Click that notification bell so you never miss a journey into the past. Thank you for listening.